Today I'm going to show you how to make Bo-Katan's jetpack. Let's get into it. For this build, I used EVA foam dowels, EVA foam triangle strips, craft foam, coffee foam, putty, super glue, mouthwash caps, model rocket parts, cutting tools, sanding tools, safety gear, scissors, razor pens, and a box cutter. I cut the puzzle pieces off of a floor tile. I'm using EVA foam because aside from being my, material of choice, it's lightweight, which is important when you're wearing a costume all day, and also it's damage resistant. So if you drop it, it will absorb the impact rather than break. I traced a square onto the foam with a paint pen. I also marked where I would cut the corners later. Then I used a sharpened work knife to cut out the square. Notice I'm using machinist blocks to keep my carpentry square in place. It takes a lot of pressure to cut through the foam and I don't want it to move around on me, so that's what that's about. Now this is going to look a little bit too tall to some people, and they're absolutely right. It's because we have to cut off the corners up here. So I cut a couple of inches off of the top to make it into more of a rectangle. Then I cut the corners off. Some of the edges are still rough from where I cut the puzzle pieces, and also the bottom is just a little bit slanted. So I sanded it smooth on my belt sander. So this is always the most time-consuming footage that I have to edit. And there's really not that much for me to say under this footage, other than sand it. It's pretty straightforward. That's it. That's all I got. Moving on. This is going to be the side that we build up all of the thrusters and fuel tanks and all that stuff, which means we'll only need to cover up this top bit. So I went ahead and covered that up with a roll of 2mm craft foam. I can't believe this was the smallest piece I had to work with. When the glue dried, I cut off the excess and then trimmed it to be flush with the backing. Then I cut the trench down the center. This is just to make the center tube more secure and have a slightly lower profile from a side view. I can't seem to ever get rid of the spirals in cardboard, so I'm just going to cover it up with cardstock. Cardstock is just real thick paper, by the way. I understand how annoying it is when I repeat myself to the regular viewers, but I gotta do it. In this case, it's also gonna lengthen the tube because I cut this up for another project. I'm not sure which one. So while that's drying, I'm gonna make the side tubes out of these rocket bodies. And I'm using them because they have to be half the diameter of the central tube. Now these ends are damaged, so I'm gonna have to cut them off. Luckily, they only have to be a few inches. So to get the vent at the bottom and also the internal structural pieces, I'm going to use this end cap that was originally from when it was a poster tube. Then I traced the circles for the internal nose cone supports. I traced and cut concentric rings for the rockets to fit onto. And this edge is not going to be exposed at all, so I'm just going to use scissors and then clean it up a bit on the belt sander. And that'll be much more effective in terms of time. Really want this to be a one-day build. It won't, because painting is always a thing, but it could be built in a day. Sanded it smooth on the belt sander. So this, if I were to cut this circle out, it would essentially just create an O-ring, and that would not be stable enough to hold this thing in place. So rather than cutting that out, I'm gonna make another circle to match the interior diameter, glue that on top, and then I can just stick it on there. And that'll be way more stable. This is part of a rocket from a model rocket kit. I'm gonna use this for the lady version, and this base, this adapter, Boba Fett missile version, and they'll be interchangeable. I glued the rings together to form a little Devo hat. So now I gotta do the edges. Then I made the little slanted bevels along the outer circumference. I did this by taking this piece of scrap foam that I cut slanted from a previous build and cut it into tiny little pieces, like as if I were cutting a carrot, a very poisoned carrot. Then I cut those individual pieces in half. Then I put the nose cone back on and attached 4 of them just so that I'd be able to get the spacing right. Oh hey, real quick, I think I should just make a quick safety announcement because I know somebody's gonna try this. Don't try and incorporate the model rocket motors into your project. They're basically bullets with blowtorches coming out the back of them, like slow tracer rounds. And there's no controlling them if they're in something non-aerodynamic. I had a rocket get stuck on the launch gantry once and expend all of its fuel while still on the launch pad. And even though it was like stuck a foot above the blast plate, it burned a hole straight through, like straight through steel. So just imagine if that's stuck on your body. Yes, it's definitely gonna burn a hole through a human. So don't mess around with rockets. Man, how is that even still a thing? You know it's gonna be the next band hobby. This concludes prop safety with William Shakespeare. When all the details were attached to the rim, I moved on to the vent at the bottom. I'm basically just putting triangular bevel strips inside of a poster tube cap, which I scuffed up a little bit first using my rotary tool. because glue doesn't always like to stick to the smooth surface of plastic. I mean, it has a little bit of a lip on the inside, so that should keep them in there, but why not err on the side of caution, you know? Then I placed it into the end of the tube and hot glued the tube to the middle of the pack. Then for the outboard nacelles, I used these former rocket bodies, which I cut down to size. Then I took foam circle offcuts and glued them in either end. The elevation has to match with the 2mm foam at the top, so I had to glue some random strips of foam between the backing and the tube before attaching them. Once they were on, I glued the gear-shaped end cap into the top of the poster tube. Then I glued a strip of foam around it to get it to match up with the backing. Then I made slanted pieces for the walls and internal ribs of the pack. After that, I put cardstock over them to close them up. Depending on how you want to attach it to your back, you may want to leave it open until you get straps in there. I'm just not using straps on this particular model, so it's not something that I'm going to worry about. You might use hooks. Then I made the outer details out of 4mm foam. First a strip to go along the top, then panels in a step formation. Then I heat formed a piece to have a slight curve in it for the middle tube. That's just so that it will adhere better and not put unnecessary tension on the glue. It also has a slanted edge at the top. Then I added 3 slanted details to the bottom. The top has to have a bit of a ledge, so I cut up a puzzle piece strip to fix that. Then I encased the nacelles in strips of foam. The nacelle coverings have kind of an interesting geometry. I made this piece out of these offcuts, which honestly, I don't really think that's necessary. You could make it just as easily from the side strips. But this is what rapid prototyping is all about. You know, you discover a million ways how not to do something. Just saying. The exact shape of these panels changes depending on which character you're building, but in general, they have an angled notch at the bottom in the side. This is to accommodate the variants that have side-mounted rocket nozzles. I added these details below the ledge using the same methods as the rocket nose cone adapter just above it. I did have to trim them a little bit though, just so they'd be flush once the glue had dried. Then I made rocket nozzles out of mouthwash caps and spheres. I think they're supposed to be thruster quads, so I made 4 jets by drilling a hole into the center of a foam cylinder and then cutting them into donuts. Then I glued those on. So Boba Fett's jetpack has them on the side, which makes sense if it's like a real jetpack because you want the engine bell as far away from the person as possible, but Mando has them here and Bo-Katan doesn't even have them at all. That's what that cutout is for. This wall is supposed to extend a little bit further in from the back plate. Most of the jetpacks have sort of these skis on either side, and I think that's because, you know, this is a very flat, angular thing and it's supposed to look like it matches up to the back of a person's armor, and humans aren't square. I'm gonna hold off on that for now until I built the back armor, just so that I can get it to match up as closely as possible. I also puttied up here to cover up some seams. Now the ends of these nacelles are flat right now, which is acceptable. I've seen that, but come on, do I really not have some kind of nose cone? I did a quick heat pass of all the foam parts to make them easier to paint. I don't want to do this for too long though, because I could inadvertently melt the hot glue. Although at that point, the whole thing would just catch on fire anyway, so melted hot glue would be the least of my worries. I also found these pieces for the nose cones of the nacelles. Then I coated everything in gray filler primer. This is just to even it out because the fact that the foam is all different colors would cause the final coat to not look right. Although if you don't need the final coat to be shiny, then you can just build this out of foam that's the same color as the rest of your armor, and then leave it unpainted. Just a thought. Primer dries pretty quickly, so I hit it with a coat of blue. That dries less quickly, so I'm gonna work on the detail pieces. These are the 2 main greeblies. This is made out of a pen casing, PVC, and a cork. This is made out of a paintbrush and the base cap of a gumball machine prize. Then I attached the antenna. When it was all together, I dry brushed the edges with silver and smudged the trenches with heavily watered down black to simulate weathering. I'm using acrylic silver this time rather than rub and buff because eventually I'm gonna have to repaint this to match what the client decides on. And rub and buff has wax in it. That's what it is. It's a wax metallic finish, which would mess up a top coat. And that was it. That's how you make Bo-Katan's jetpack. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this build, then you can subscribe and hit the bell icon to see upcoming builds. Because let's be honest, the subscribe button doesn't do what it used to, and if you actually want to get notified about upcoming builds, then you gotta hit that bell icon. Otherwise, they'll be lost to the infinite scroll of your inbox. Be sure to leave a comment below to let me know what you'd like to see me make next. And lastly, I'd like to thank my patrons, the names scrolling by, who make these videos possible. To actually build something takes a whole lot more time and money. These videos just wouldn't be possible without the support of my patrons. So So if you enjoy these builds, want to see more of them, and want your build request to carry a bit more weight, then think about heading on over to the Patreon page, where you can enjoy ad-free early uploads. Thanks for watching, happy crafting, see you later.